for those of you who don't know me, Mac Harman, I am the founder and CEO of Balsam Hill. That's our consumer brand. Our parent company that owns it is Balsam Brands. I use them interchangeably, not to confuse anyone. And for those of you who don't know what we do, we're a direct-to-consumer retailer. We sell a little bit through partners like Nordstrom, but we sell holiday decor, especially artificial Christmas trees and Christmas decorations, to consumers in Europe, in North America, and in Australia. And in hearing Dave's last talk, thinking about the difference between venture-funded and being an evergreen company, I'll just mention you may have heard of some popular digitally native direct-to-consumer companies like us, such as Warby Parker or Allbirds. We're very similar to them, focused on holiday decor, but we have some differences. One is we never took venture funding. The second is that we're private, and the third is we've actually turned a profit. So like any good evergreen company, we have our purpose. Our purpose is to create joy together. That's our North Star as a business. And we think of it in kind of three different ways. The first is with our team. We want to create joy together as we work together. We work hard. It's a very seasonal business, and we want to make sure that we're creating joy together with our team. The second way is we want to create joy together with our partners in the communities in which we live and work. And then the third way is, of course, we want our customers to create joy together. Whether that's them shopping on our website or talking to our customer service team, perhaps even about a problem with one of our products, whether it's them taking out our products and decorating for a holiday. And of course, if it's them celebrating a holiday together with friends and family, we want them to create joy together. So that's what drives us as a business. Here's what I'd like to talk about in my short time today. I want to talk about my introduction to Dave and Evergreen. I want to talk about my background just for a little bit to set up why I chose to start an evergreen business despite being on this kind of standard path in Silicon Valley. And then I want to talk about 5 things that I took from being in Silicon Valley that were actually helpful. It's not all bad. There were some great strategies, and I'm hoping that there might be a nugget in there somewhere for one of you in your business. And then lastly, I'll just wrap up by talking about evergreen values. So I want to take you back to spring of 2013. As Balsam Hill, we'd just done about $40 million in revenue, and I was across our different businesses. And I was sitting in my office talking with a good friend, Lee. She also runs a private and profitable evergreen business. And she said to me, she said, "Mac, have you ever heard of this guy, Dave Wharton? He went to Stanford like you." And I'm like, "No, I haven't heard of him." But that led to a phone call soon thereafter with Dave. And Dave asked me some questions and shared a little bit about what he was up to. And at the end of the call, he said, "Mac, I am convening a gathering of evergreen leaders like yourself up in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I'd really be honored if you could join us." And I said, well, I'm really interested in what you're doing. Let me check my calendar. It's only in 3 weeks. It turned out I could come, and soon thereafter, I was on a plane, and I came up to the first summit, which Dave just mentioned. And I can't explain to you how amazing that gathering was. In my mind, it was like 3 or 4 days long, and apparently it was much shorter, but there was so much we'd never been in a place with other evergreen leaders. Like each of us maybe knew 1 or 2, but to be around a whole group of us, it was just so encouraging. And on that very last night of the summit, maybe the only night, I'm not even sure, but we were in Trail Creek Cabin, where we'll be later this week, down the road behind me, and we fit in not only the building, but half of the building. We're all sitting around tables, and we started getting up at the different tables and toasting each other and toasting Dave. And honestly, it was a very emotional evening because we just had this kind of cathartic experience of like, wow, we're not alone anymore. And so I think that's the moment, Dave had announced, we're going to move forward with this institute, and it's the moment we all knew that this was something really, really special. And so personally, I want to thank Dave for taking the risk to do this learning journey, taking the risk to his career, taking the risk personally, taking the risk financially for starting this organization. And so could we all give him a hand? Thanks, Dave. So that was just a trick to get some people to clap while I was up here. But I want to go back and talk a little bit about my background so you can understand why I started an evergreen company. And I'm going to take you back to some of my early entrepreneurial ventures with a shout out to Robert and the Radio Flyer team, because they mostly centered around my Radio Flyer wagon. There's my mobile popcorn and lemonade stand. There was my mobile car washing business, which was quite profitable, by the way. But then I got busy and was on that kind of normal staircase ladder of high school and college, and then I went to McKinsey to kind of broaden my business horizons, and then I did the obligatory nonprofit before I went to business school, and so I was on kind of the standard path. But there was something that came about in there that sort of shaped my evergreen path, and that is I grew up around a small family business. My dad ran a company, too small to qualify even for Tugboat membership. And it wasn't a particularly profitable business, but it was a very people-first business. And so I just learned sitting around the dinner table as he thought about making decisions. And then, unfortunately, my father passed away. And so I ended up taking over that business at the age of 24. And I actually ran that as a side job from my time at McKinsey through starting Balsam Hill. And so that gave me kind of this practical experience of making difficult decisions as we tried to make payroll each month. So with that background, I was off to Stanford to go to business school. And I came into Stanford with this idea that I wanted to pivot my career into marketing because I was really fascinated with that. But I got about a week into my summer internship between my first and my second year of business school. And literally the end of the first week, and I was just like, you know what? I don't know if I can work for big companies right now. Like, life seems too short to be stuck in some of these bureaucracies. And it was a great company, but that's when I made the decision, you know what, I'm gonna go back and rediscover my entrepreneurial roots, maybe pull out my radio flyer wagon, and figure out some business to start after I graduated from Stanford. And so I went into my second year of school thinking, okay, I'm gonna start a business, and I'm a Stanford MBA, so of course there's just one way to do this, right? Like, I went to good schools, I went to McKinsey, here I am at Stanford, so of course the next thing you do is you go raise venture capital on Sand Hill Road. That's the road where all the venture capital offices are. It's right on the edge of the Stanford campus, and that's kind of what you do. So I went in, and I took all these classes in my second year, trying to learn as much as I could about starting a business. But what happened was really interesting. I noticed two patterns. And I noticed them pretty quickly. And the first one was this. When I sat in classes that kind of had simulated case studies of like, hey, you're running a business, how would you handle this? I noticed that the way I thought about it and the way that other people with operating experience thought about it was really different than people who didn't have operating experience, especially those who had come out of undergrad and just been investors and had never had any practical experience. And I said to myself, you know, I don't think I want those folks helping run my company because they've never been in that operating seat. So I filed that pattern away. And then the second one that was really interesting is that I was in these classes, and when you go to Stanford Business School, you have the opportunity to hear from amazing founders. I mean, we're getting the 0.001% of most successful startups coming in and speaking about their experience. These are household names that we all know. And they'd come in and they'd tell these just unbelievable glory stories and cool stories, and you're just like, oh, this is so amazing. I'm gonna go start the next Facebook or whatever it was. And I noticed, though, towards the end of each class, it seemed like there was always what I call a but or an until moment. Everything was great, but then I didn't see things the same way the investors did, and they let me go. Everything was great, but then we realized, you know, we need to have a revenue model and not just got eyeballs, and they thought somebody with more experience would be a better leader for this business. So there were so many of these stories that came in, but it always seemed like the founder who had put all this passion into it ended up not being in the business any longer. And so that was the other pattern that led me pretty quickly in my second year to decide, you know what, if I'm gonna put all this effort into starting a business, I'd really like to stay in control of it and not cede control to venture capitalists, especially my very nice but financially oriented classmates that had never operated before. And this pattern was actually punctuated at my Stanford graduation by the speaker who famously asked, how do you get fired from a company that you started? So that's what set me off on what I like to call the parallel road less traveled. Now, Sand Hill Road is literally a road in Silicon Valley where all the venture capitalists are. And I started Balsam on a side road parallel to Sand Hill Road called Varian Way. It's very small. I've probably just doubled the number of people who've ever heard of it by mentioning it here. But it's home to some Stanford faculty apartments, which is where I happened to live after I graduated from Stanford. And interesting note about Varian Way, it turns out it's named for the Varian brothers, who are associated with Stanford, started what became 3 companies. I think they ended up having over 10,000 patents, made unbelievable contributions to Silicon Valley and around the world. But in researching for this talk, I learned that they almost went out of business because they were trying to be so radically people first in the 1950s that they couldn't get funding. So they figured it out, but it was kind of appropriate to end up starting an Evergreen company on Varian Way. And in reference to Hewlett-Packard, which Dave just mentioned, I will say I did try to start Balsam Hill in my garage, just like they did, but I was not smart enough to get the Wi-Fi signal to work there. So I settled for storing product there and started my apartment. But anyway, that's how I came to this decision to start an Evergreen business instead of a venture-backed business. So what I want to do now is just talk about 5 things that I learned from Silicon Valley that were actually quite helpful. And I'll go through these quickly, but I hope that they might be little nuggets for you as you think about your Evergreen business. The first one is this idea to remain asset light through your MVP. In this case, MVP stands for minimal viable product. So if you're thinking about launching a new product or service line in your business, you might say, okay, what's the minimal viable product I can put out there to test if this is going to work before we really invest a lot in it? And so when I started Balsam, I did so because I didn't know if it was going to work. And so I said, okay, how do I start this business with the least amount of capital expenditures to test it? And so what I did is I just outsourced everything. And in fact, that first year, we did a few $1,000,000 in revenue, but I was the only full-time employee. And so everything was outsourced: customer service, manufacturing, logistics, web design. I mean, every part of the business. Now, we've found that it's successful. We've brought much of that in-house, and we have hundreds of people that do it. But I was able to outsource it, and that allowed me to test things really quickly in an efficient way, because remember, I'm bootstrapping this business. I'm not raising the $250 million I guess Dave maybe would have given me if I had knocked on his door. And in fact, the only capital asset we had besides the inventory we had to sell was this laptop computer right here, which I've saved for the Balsam Museum someday. So that was literally our only asset. All right, so moving forward, the second thing that I learned in starting the business and that I took from Silicon Valley is what I call the fail fast model. And I think you've probably heard of this, but it's the idea of how do you try things quickly? If they don't work, cut it off. And so we did this in 2007 in our second year. And what I realized starting a direct-to-consumer business that so relied on advertising was, boy, it's really hard to learn what works when you sell a seasonal product that people only buy in a short window of time once a year. And so what I decided we should do is try as many marketing strategies as we possibly could in this window of time, as many as our little tiny team could handle, at the lowest possible cost, but still that would give us statistically meaningful results. And so we did that, and we actually said, I said, you know what, let's go ahead and lose money this year. I realize that might be antithetical to the evergreen value of profitability, but let's go ahead and lose money, and then we'll double down on the winners, and we'll do this for a couple years. Maybe this is crossing the chasm, I'm not sure, but we'll do this for a while till we figure out what works, and then we'll really triple down on it. And so we did that in 2007. We actually were profitable in 2006 in our first year. We lost several $1,000,000 in 2007. We broke even in 2008 as we doubled and tripled down on the winners. And so we learned some of the things that worked for us. We learned some that didn't, which included running print ads with vacuum cleaners. So we moved on from that model. The third thing that I wanted to share that we took from Silicon Valley and lots of other places is this idea that diversity of thought leads to the richest outcomes. And the way I'll explain this is at Balsam, we do not use the term culture fit. We actually hate the term culture fit, and we think it's wrong. We think what we should think about is culture add, because we want to bring people into our company who don't look just like us, who don't think the same way, and can bring a diversity of thought in, because that's going to help us run a better company, and it's going to help us serve our customers who are diverse in a better way. And so 3 years ago, I sat in a recruiting decision meeting for a pretty senior candidate. And the discussion we were having is, boy, this person has incredible experience, but they just kind of show up a little bit differently, and is that going to be okay? They kind of gave terse answers to questions, and they were a lot more introverted than the rest of us. And I said, you know, this is a good example of what we're talking about with culture add. And so we moved forward, and we brought that person into the company. And I can tell you today, 3 years later, this person has not only driven tremendous business results for us, but they have helped shape our culture in a way that other people who are more introverted feel comfortable not only joining the company, but showing up and contributing in a big way. So that's just one example. And Silicon Valley attracts talent from all over the world. And so we were in that mix of talent, and we've been able to go to some of our other geographies, even working with local governments to increase diversity in the hiring pool so that we can have diverse folks coming in. And so some of the ways we've done that, in Silicon Valley, we're one of the only small companies that would sponsor visas and green cards for international talent, which brought in tremendous talent to our company. We also, I'm really proud to say, have always had a majority of women on our executive team. And there's so many things that we've done to bring this diverse group in that has really, truly made us a better company. All right, the fourth thing I want to mention is identifying and embracing game-changing technologies. Now, when we were starting in Silicon Valley, doing this online advertising as a digitally native company, Google and Google, not yet Facebook, but Google and Yahoo, if you remember that. I still have a Yahoo email address. Anyway, that's where people were going to learn and search. And so we embraced search engine optimization and pay-per-click marketing. And being in Silicon Valley, so much of that was happening there that we had, companies we could go see. We could drive over and meet with Google. We had friends working in these companies, so we were able to really accelerate building our brand at a low cost by embracing those technologies. But what I want to talk about more today is generative AI. And it's been mentioned a few times. I saw some images that were generated and posted in our Tugboat Slack channel yesterday. But I think this is a really game-changing technology. And so the analogy I want to use to think about generative AI is this. If you go back to the 1980s when the personal computer was coming out, everyone was hearing about it, right? Everyone was reading about it in the newspaper. But I think if we could go back in time and make a cohort of companies like my dad, actually, my dad's small business, that bought a computer and experimented with it instead of just reading about computers, I think if we could look at that first cohort versus that second cohort, I think the first cohort probably massively outperformed the folks that were just reading about it. So for those of, for many of you, when you think about MLMs or ChatGPT, like you've heard about it and you've embraced it. I mean, heck, it's been out 6 months, right? So it's been out a long time in the speed of which things are moving. Some of you may have been like, I'm reading about it, but I haven't done anything. If that's you, I encourage you, pull your phone out right now, download ChatGPT, and before you go to bed tonight, try your first query. Because I think you'll be blown away, and I think it will also start showing you the power that it may have to transform your business. As Dave said, it might be bigger than a lot of the other changes we've seen together. And so what we're doing at Balsam actually is we have made one of our summer goals for this year that every one of our 300 plus employees spend at least an hour a week learning about generative AI and experimenting with it. Maybe nothing will come from it, but we want them to think about how can it help them, how can it help our business better serve our customers and better operate our business. And already in the first few weeks of this, we've seen some tremendous things. So I encourage you, check out generative AI and make sure you identify and embrace game-changing technologies. Lastly, I want to share that I took from Silicon Valley, because remember, Tugboat wasn't formed yet. Investing in a supportive group of leaders is just so helpful when you're running a business. It is hard to be CEO. It's hard to be a founder. There's a lot of weight that we carry on our shoulders. And for me to be in an environment where there were so many other entrepreneurs going through different things, where I could share my challenges, share those little successes, it was just so supportive to be there. And even though I thought about funding and had a long-term view compared to a lot of my other peers in that community, it was tremendously helpful. And then I'm so grateful that for the last 10 years, I've had this supportive community. So I encourage you, please invest in this community. I know so many of us are. And also look for local communities where you can invest in a supportive group of leaders, because it'll help us build better evergreen businesses. Now, I want to talk just briefly about evergreen values. The 7 Ps weren't coined yet. Chris and Dave hadn't put those together yet when Balsam started, but I hope you've heard a lot of those 7 Ps throughout how we thought about building Balsam Brands. Certainly staying private was a big one, and with the exception of when we employed the fail fast model, being profitable was really important. We're certainly a very people-first company, and then we've also been fortunate to enjoy some tremendous pace growth throughout our 17-year history, and that's something that bootstrapping has allowed us to do and forced us to make disciplined decisions so that we have had this pace growth. So with that, I just want to wrap up and say I'm so grateful that I chose the parallel path less traveled and started an evergreen business. I didn't know it was called that at the time. I just saw these two patterns and decided that I wanted to try and do things differently than that standard path I'd been on through kind of my background and the Stanford Business School experience. I'm so grateful for it, not only because, frankly, I think I would have been fired by now if I hadn't, if I had taken venture capital funds, someone would have decided I wasn't the right person. But more importantly, I think we've really been able to build a company that is focused on our purpose of creating joy together, build a long-term company that can really help many people around the world create joy together, and that's a beautiful thing we get to do. So thank you so much for being part of this supportive community and helping me feel supported as I build this business. I look forward to the next 10 years. I won't be here for the next 100, but I look forward to continuing to build our businesses together and spending time with you this week. Thanks so much.